Did you know that John Lennon accidentally invented the use of guitar feedback in songs? Or that Ringo was hungover for a scene in A Hard Day's Night? Well, I'll tell you all about it. But first, let's see how the Beatles became the most famous band in music history. And that's not an overstatement. They have 20 #1 singles, 19 #1 albums, and 15 recordings in the Grammy Hall of Fame. They've also received Brit Awards, Echo Awards in Germany, World Music Awards, and been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Officially forming in 1960, their music has continued to inspire new generations of artists and diehard fans half a century later. Hi, I'm Tetris, and we're here to give you your Beatles fix. So get ready, because Mic Drop is counting down 107 music facts you should know about the Beatles. Let's get started. Fact number 1. The Beatles' story started during John Lennon's early days in Liverpool, England. John fell in love with American rock and roll music in the mid-1950s. Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, and Buddy Holly inspired him to pick up a guitar. Fact number 2. John formed a band named the Quarrymen, classmates at the Quarry Bank High School. The band name references a line from the school's song, Quarrymen Old Before Our Birth, straining each muscle and sinew. Co-founder Pete Shotton said that choosing the name was an example of John's sarcastic sense of humor because John didn't pay much attention to his studies. Fact number 3. The Quarrymen were also influenced by Britain's version of rock and roll called skiffle. Skiffle originated in the US during the 1920s in poor communities where they would use jugs, banjos, harmonicas, washboards, and other instruments to make music. The style was revived in Britain after World War II and combined with folk, jazz, and rock music. Fact number 4. July 6, 1957 started out as a regular date for the Quarrymen, but it proved to be one of the most important dates in music history. The band played a gig that night, and their on and off again bassist, Ivan Vaughan, introduced John Lennon to his Liverpool Institute classmate, Paul McCartney. Paul was only 15 years old. Fact number 5. Paul showed John how to tune a guitar and performed a few songs for him by rock and rollers Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran, and Little Richard. A couple weeks later, Paul was invited to join the Quarrymen as a second guitarist and singer. Fact number 6. The next year, George Harrison joined the group. Paul and George were classmates at the Liverpool Institute. After an audition on top of a double-decker bus, George was brought in as the third guitarist. Fact number 7. Paul had to talk John into letting George join. John was only 17, but he was already enrolled at Liverpool Art College. George was 14, about to turn 15. After he joined, John, Paul, and George stayed constant, and the rest of the group went through lineup changes over the next few years. Fact number 8. They soon grew tired of the name Quarrymen and tried out other options. They called themselves Johnny and the Moondogs, the Silver Beats, and the Silver Beatles. Fact number 9. For a couple months in March 1960, the group split, and John and Paul played a couple shows under the band name Nerk Twins. But they soon got back together and decided on the Silver Beatles. Fact number 10. The Silver Beatles was a suggestion from their friend Brian Casser of Cass and the Casanovas. He originally suggested Long John and the Silver Beatles, but John Lennon was not into the whole Long John thing. He rejected that and also the band name Long John Silver. Can you imagine them as a pirate-themed band? Nah, me neither. Fact number 11. There are many stories about the band's name. George and Paul both credit John and John's bandmate at the time, Stuart Sutcliffe, for coming up with the Beatles. One explanation is that it was a play on the name of Buddy Holly's band, the Crickets. Another story claims that it was from the Marlon Brando movie, The Wild Ones, which used Beatles as a slang term for biker girls. The movie was actually banned from the UK until 1960, coincidentally, the year they changed their name. Allegedly, Stewart suggested the name, and John agreed, but changed the second E to an A so that the band had more of its own identity. And since they made beat music, even George and Paul are not sure exactly where their bandmates got the name from. But what we all know is, it worked. Fact number 12. Stu Sutcliffe is one of the most important people in the Beatles story, but very few people have heard of him. Not only did he help name the band, but he also influenced his early style. Press photos from this period show the boys sporting black leather jackets like the characters in The Wild Ones and Elvis Presley pompadour hairstyles. Sutcliffe played bass guitar for a while in the band. Then when drummer Pete Best joined, John, Paul, George, and Stu, the original version of the Beatles was born. Fact number 13. John Lennon was born October 9, 1940 in Liverpool, England. He was an only child and his parents Fred and Julia divorced when he was only a toddler. After the split, custody was given to his aunt Mary Smith. also known as Mimi, and she remained his parental guardian until he reached adulthood. Fact 14. His real mother, Julia, was not very present in John's life, but she did encourage him to learn guitar. Unfortunately, she was killed in a car accident when he was 17. John paid tribute to her in the song Julia on The Beatles, aka The White Album. It is the only song released under the Beatles' name that only features John. Fact 15. Paul is actually McCartney's middle name. He was born James Paul McCartney on June 18, 1942 in Liverpool, England. His father Jim was in a number of ragtime and jazz bands. He played both piano and trumpet. Jim worked in the cotton industry, and Paul's mother, Mary, worked as a midwife. Fact 16. George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943, in his family's Liverpool home. He and Lennon both had Irish heritage. George played in the skiffle group, the Rebels, with his brother Peter before joining the Quarrymen. Fact number 17. Stuart Ferguson Victor Sutcliffe was born on June 23, 1940, in Edinburgh, and was raised in Liverpool. He met John Lennon in art school. Fact 18. Stuart was a visual artist. He bought a bass guitar with the money he earned from selling his first painting. Fact 19. Though Stuart was not the greatest musician, he contributed to the band in other ways. He served as their manager and let them rehearse in his flat. They occasionally let him take center stage at live shows to sing Elvis, Love Me Tender. Fact number 20. Peter Randolph Best was born on November 24, 1941 in Madras, India, and his family soon moved to Liverpool. His first notable band was the Blackjacks. They played gigs at his mother's coffee house. Later, the venue hosted some of the Quarrymen's first gigs. Fact 21. With the band members in place, the Beatles headed off to Germany for their first tour in 1960. Being a major port city, Hamburg attracted musicians that wanted their music heard by larger audiences. Travelers, sailors, prostitutes, and many other people came through the clubs. The scene grew, and the Beatles became friendly rivals with some other English and mainland European bands. One of the bands was called Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, with Ringo Starr on drums. Fact 22. While in Germany, the Beatles met Klaus Voormann. Klaus was an artist and musician that often attended concerts by both the Beatles and Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. In 1966, he created the artwork for the Beatles album Revolver and played bass on much of Lennon's solo records. Fact 23. Tensions rose within the Beatles as they played in Hamburg. Stu Sutcliffe had the rock star image and demeanor, but his musicianship didn't match the others. On top of that, he and Paul were prone to disagreements and physical fights. Stu soon left the group in 1961 to pursue painting after being offered a scholarship at Hamburg College of Art. Fact 24. Stuart was also recently engaged to his girlfriend of 3 months, German photographer Astrid Kircher, whom he met at a Hamburg bar through her ex-boyfriend, Klaus Voormann. Stuart and Astrid went to live in Liverpool to meet his family, but unfortunately less than a year later, Stu died unexpectedly in April 1962 due to a brain hemorrhage. Fact 25. 3 songs with Stuart Sutcliffe on bass were released on Volume 1 of the Beatles Anthology Trilogy in 1995. These are the only songs he recorded in his lifetime. Fact 26. Astrid stayed close with the Beatles. She took many of the early photographs of the band in their biker-inspired leather. She is also credited for cutting her hair into the famous mop-top style that became so closely associated with the Beatles' early years. Astrid said it was a popular hairstyle at her art school, and Stu was the first one who was brave enough to try it. Fact 27. Cracks started showing between Pete Best and the rest of the band while playing in Germany. Pete Best was the only Beatle to not get the mop-top haircut. He also refused to join them in taking Preludin pills, a legal stimulant drug at the time, which John, Paul, and George took to help them stay up on nights they had to play late shows. Only 4 songs from this period feature Pete Best on lead vocals. One of them, called Peppermint Twist, had McCartney switch to drums when they played it live. Fact number 28. The Beatles eventually moved over to play the Top 10 Club, which broke their previous contract with Inja Club owner Bruno Kroschmeider, and they got the axe. So one night, when the members went to get their stuff from the movie theater Bruno owned and they had been staying in, Pete and Paul attached a condom to a concrete wall and set it on fire. Bruno reported them, and Pete and Paul spent 3 hours locked up for attempted arson, and then were deported back to England. Guess Germans don't like practical jokes. Fact 29. The band received a big break when they returned to Hamburg in 1921. Polydor Records hired them to play as the backing band for singer Tony Sheridan. The track My Bunny was released under the name Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers. An original copy of this first Beatles recording was eventually released in America and is worth up to $12,000 in collector's circles. Fact 30. The Beatles' fortune was ultimately changed for the better when they met Brian Epstein. Brian started out as an inspiring actor before selling pianos, wireless radios, and gramophone records as a part of his family business. His record sales were so successful that he started writing a music column. The column led him to a Beatles concert at the Cavern Club in Liverpool, after which he offered to manage the group. Fact 31. Brian tried to get the Beatles a record deal, but several companies in England passed on signing them. That's right, almost no one thought that the Beatles were going anywhere. Pretty unbelievable. But finally, they got an audition at the world-famous Abbey Road Studios for EMI Records in 1962. After the audition, producer George Martin offered them a deal. Fact 32. Before deciding to work with rock and roll bands, George Martin mainly produced comedy records. He went on to produce almost all of the Beatles albums, with the exception of Let It Be. He also arranged the instrumental tracks for much of their music. Fact 33. Martin liked John, Paul, and George, but he told them Pete Best had to go. So Pete was fired, and they asked Ringo Starr to replace him. Fact 34. Ringo was born as Richard Starkey on July 7, 1940, in Liverpool, England. He was an unhealthy kid, suffering from a coma caused by appendicitis, pleurisy, and food allergies. The sicknesses kept him behind in school. Fact 35. Thankfully, Ringo got healthier in his teenage years and joined the Skiffle movement. He co-founded the Eddie Miles Band, and in 1959, he joined the Raving Texans, a backing band for a local singer, Rory Storm. They changed their name to Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, and while touring in Hamburg, he met the Beatles. Fact 36. His big rings led bandmates in the Hurricanes to call him Ringo, and though he didn't like having the spotlight on himself during drum solos, the rest of the band wanted a gimmick. He took the last name Starr so that his solos could be billed as Star Time. Ringo Starr became his permanent professional name. Fact 37. Ringo's unique style of drumming was created by necessity. He was a left-handed player that was forced to adapt his technique to a right-handed kid. You know what they say, necessity is the mother of invention. That's a shout out to Frank Zappa, in case you were wondering. Fact 38. The Beatles had formed a loyal following in Hamburg by 1962. Fights broke out among fans when Pete Best was sacked in favor of Ringo. Fans chanted Pete forever, Ringo never. But their tune changed eventually, so not never. Fact 39. George Martin was also skeptical of Ringo. After recording a version of their first single, Love Me Do, with Ringo on drums, the band recorded another version with Andy White on drums, and Ringo playing the tambourine. The version with White's drumming was released in England, while the version with Ringo's drumming appears on their first studio album, Please Please Me. An earlier version of the song, with Pete Best on drums, was recorded before he left the group, but was never released until 1995 on the Anthology Volume 1 record. Fact 40. Love Me Do is a historic song in many ways. Number 1, it was the first song released under the official Beatles name. Number 2, it was the first song to bear the now legendary Lennon-McCartney songwriting credit. Number 3, it introduced Paul and John's signature harmony vocals. Number 4, it also hints at themes John Lennon explored in later songs. And number 5, the phrase Love Me Do was inspired by author Lewis Carroll's language and imagery, something Lennon turned to again in Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and I Am the Walrus. Oh, and did I mention the song reached number 17 on the British charts and was their first hit? Yeah. Fact 41. To capitalize on the success of Love Me Do, they recorded the album Please Please Me in just one day. It was released in the UK in April 1963, and it signaled a real change in popular music. The Beatles incorporated the sound of Motown, girl groups, R&B, and 50s rock and roll covers, along with their original compositions. John Lennon gave such a passionate performance during the recording of the Isley Brothers cover Twist and Shout that he nearly lost his voice. Fact 42. The title track, Please Please Me, was released next and hit number 2 in the UK, becoming their first major hit. Fact 43. Their next single, From Me to You, started a trend of success for the Beatles. Between 1963 and 1970, 17 of their 23 singles topped the British charts. Fact 44. I Wanna Hold Your Hand was the song that gave them their huge break in America. It hit number 1 in the States in 1964. Fact 45. A hysterical craze then broke out all over the world, dubbed Beatlemania. Fans mobbed the guys on their first world tour in Europe, Hong Kong, Australia, and the United States. Things got so frenzied that the Beatles and Brian Epstein needed police protection in public. You can't control those boy band fans. Time for the lightning round. When you are the biggest band on planet Earth, people invent their own myths about you. In 1969, rumors started that Paul McCartney actually died 3 years earlier. We're going to take a look at some of the clues the Beatles supposedly put in their songs and album art that confirm the conspiracy theory for some fans. Fact number 46. The story starts in November 1966. Paul allegedly stormed out of a Sgt. Pepper recording session and crashed his car. Fact number 47. Fans suspected that Paul was replaced by a lookalike named William Shears Campbell or William Shepard. Ringo's character in the fictional Lonely Hearts Club Band is introduced as Billy Shears during the track With a Little Help from My Friends on Sgt. Pepper. Fact number 48. Russ Gibb, a DJ in Michigan, fanned the flames higher when he played the track Revolution 9 backwards. Fans agreed that the phrase, number 9, sounded like Turn Me On, Dead Man. Weird. Fact number 49. Several other songs were set to mention the time and day of Paul's death. One was the opening line of She's Leaving Home, which is Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins. Similar to that, Lady Madonna announces that Wednesday morning papers didn't come. Fact number 50. The revolutionary cover of Sgt. Pepper also offers clues. The album cover shows an open hand above McCartney's head, which in some religions is the symbol of death, signifying that someone will die or has recently died. On the back cover, Paul has his back to the camera, suggesting that he is hiding his identity. You know, because he's a lookalike. Fact number 51. The cover of Magical Mystery Tour features the word Beatles in stars. When held up to a mirror, it reveals a telephone number, 231-7438, which eerily belonged to a London mortuary. Fact number 52. Both covers of Yesterday and Today also supposedly confirmed Paul's death. The violence of the Butcher cover seemed like a reference to the brutality of Paul's death. And on the updated, less controversial cover, Paul crouches in a trunk that seems symbolic of a casket. Lots of symbolism here. Fact number 53. Abbey Road has the most references to the Paul died myth. Ian McMillan photographed the Beatles walking in a funeral procession. Lennon is dressed in all white as a priest. Ringo is in a black suit as an undertaker. Paul is barefoot, as many corpses would be, and George follows as a gravedigger. Fact number 54. Paul was also out of step with the others in this photo, with his eyes closed like a corpse. He holds a cigarette in his right hand, which struck fans as strange, since Paul is left-handed. They concluded that it must have been a lookalike. Fact number 55. The most chilling clue in the funeral photo is easy to miss. The Volkswagen Beetle car in the background has a license plate that reads LMW 28IF. LMW was taken to stand for Linda McCartney Weeps. Kind of a reach. And 28IF was interpreted to reference Paul's age if he had survived the car accident. However, at the time of Abbey Road's release, he would have been 27, not 28. Paul is fine, you guys. That's the end of our lightning round. This myth was ramped up again thanks to the internet, keeping rumors flying around to this day. So what do you guys think? Do the clues prove the theory? Comment below and let us know. And now it's back to the facts. Fact 56. On February 7th, 1964, thousands of diehard fans showed up at New York's JFK Airport to welcome the Beatles to the United States. 2 days later, they played their first televised concert in the US, appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show. Before YouTube, it was variety shows like Ed Sullivan's that helped artists break out. 73 million viewers watched that performance, which was about 34% of the entire American population in 1964. Fact 57. The performance helped them set another record. Their new song, Can't Buy Me Love, became the first single to reach the top of both the American and British charts. That was a massive success in the 60s before internet technology could transmit a song anywhere in the world. Fact 58. Later in the month, the Beatles became the first music act in history to hold down all top 5 spots on the Billboard Hot 100. They dominated the industry with Can't Buy Me Love, Twist and Shout, She Loves You, I Wanna Hold Your Hand, and Please Please Me. Fact 59. Unfortunately, instead of focusing on their musical talents, the press often wanted to discuss their haircuts. Shortly after arriving in America, an interviewer asked George Harrison what he called the hairstyle. To jab at the interviewer, George sarcastically said he called it Arthur. That scene was later recreated in the Beatles' first film, A Hard Day's Night. Fact 60. A Hard Day's Night is about a day in the life of the Beatles during the madness of Beatlemania. It was another artistic milestone because it's one of the first mockumentaries made, and set the precedent for later mock-style movies like Spinal Tap and shows like Parks and Rec. Film critic Roger Ebert gave the movie a 4-star review. Fact 61. The movie title comes from what the band calls Ringoisms. These were backward or mangled expressions that Ringo's star used often. Fittingly, Ringo plays the main character of the movie. Fact 62. George Harrison met his future wife Pattie Boyd on the set of A Hard Day's Night. She plays a young girl chatting up Paul on the train, but in real life, George won her heart. Fact 63. Wilfrid Brambell plays Paul's father in the movie. He was a big star in England at the time for his role on the TV show Steptoe and Son. That show was later remade in America as Stanford and Son, starring comedian Red Fox. Fact 64. Lennon was absent from filming for a few days because he was promoting his first book in his own right, a collection of poems, short stories, and drawings. It was the first solo project by any Beatle. It also introduced fans to John's literary and political sides. But because he was gone during the filming of Can't Buy Me Love for the movie, they used a double for Lennon, and then shot and inserted some close-ups of John when he returned. Fact 65. A few other movie tidbits that many people don't know is that 1. The fans chasing them in the opening scene are actual real fans and not actors. 2. George's stubble in the opener is also real. He even ripped his suit. Number 3. Ringo was praised for his acting skills in one scene where he appears sorrowful and gloomy, but he was actually really just hungover. Authentic gloom. Fact 66. Guitar feedback became a staple for rockers like Jimi Hendrix and punk bands that followed. But did you know that one of the first recorded uses of feedback is on a Beatles song? John Lennon used it in the beginning of I Feel Fine in 1964. That's 3 years before Jimi Hendrix's Experience recorded his first album. John later said it was an accident that happened when he stood too close to an amplifier. Well, accidents can be magical. Fact 67. By 1965, the band was experimenting even more with their sound, being influenced by the folk rock movement in America and Bob Dylan's introspective lyrics. In addition to introducing the Beatles to a new music style, Bob Dylan also introduced the band Cannabis during a trip to New York. Fact 68. The music changes meant that producer George Martin became a more important part of the track Yesterday. It was the first Beatles song to feature Martin's signature sound and the first to feature a solo performance by one of the band's members. Paul is the only band member that plays on the recording. Fact 69. Yesterday was named the most recorded song of all time by the Guinness Book of World Records in 1986. They estimated that between 1965 and 1986, the song was covered about 1,600 times. Should we make one more? Nah, I'll stick to reading. Fact 70. The Beatles' second movie, Help, was released in 1965. It's essentially a James Bond parody in which the Beatles are pursued by an Indian death cult. Damn! The Beatles threw in their quirky sense of humor, like in A Hard Day's Night, but they also added some Bond signatures. They used exotic locations, like the Bahamas and the Swiss Alps, had a seductively beautiful woman who they weren't sure they could trust, and assassins trying to kill them, and even had a mad scientist in the film. That sounds pretty 007 to me. Fact 71. Some filming for the movie took place at an Indian restaurant. It was the first time the Beatles heard music from India, and it began a lifelong fascination for George. He learned the sitar, an instrument often used in Indian culture that is similar to a guitar, and he later used it in many Beatles songs, including Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, and Within You, Without You. Fact 72. The Beatles helped invent another rock standard that year when they played Shea Stadium, the home of the New York Mets. Sports stadiums were not used for concerts or any other events besides sports in that era. The Beatles changed that tradition when 55,000 fans attended the show and drowned out the music with their screams. Fact 73. The Beatles were the biggest band in the world by the mid-60s, and as their popularity grew, they became bigger targets for critics. In 1966, a US teen magazine printed John Lennon's comments saying that we're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was alright, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me. The backlash was immediate. 2 DJs in Alabama initiated a Beatles boycott, and soon people all over the country were burning their Beatles records. Fact 74. Another controversy erupted over the album cover for Yesterday and Today. Capitol Records had to put together this compilation of random Beatles songs so they could make a little extra money. When photographer Robert Whitaker was enlisted to shoot the album cover, he decided to stage the boys in white butcher coats covered in bloody beef and baby doll body parts. Creepy. There were conflicting reports about the meaning of the image from Whitaker and the Beatles themselves. The explanations range from it being a shot against Capitol Records for chopping up their music to maximize profits to a symbolic stance against the Vietnam War. All we know is you might have to sleep with the lights on after looking at this. Fact 75. Not happy with the photo, Capitol Records recalled every copy of the album it could find and pasted a new image over the butcher cover. An original creepy copy of Yesterday and Today can be found in collector's markets for about $10,000 to $15,000. Fact 76. The stress of touring and negative publicity made the band retreat, and playing San Francisco's Candlestick Park in 1966, the Beatles retired from touring. John took a handheld camera to the stage to commemorate the final show. Fact 77. The band needed another way of delivering their music to audiences, now that they were not playing live anymore. So they pioneered short-form films, or music videos, that told a story with a concept and featured the band playing along with the song. Paperback Writer and Rain were the first two tracks to get made into music videos. Fact 78. The Beatles went on a brief hiatus soon. John flew to Spain to play the role of Private Gripweed in Richard Lester's movie How I Won the War. The film is a dark comedy about war based on the book by Patrick Ryan. Fact 79. While in Spain, John wrote the song Strawberry Fields Forever. Strawberry Fields was the name of a Salvation Army children's home near John Lennon's childhood home. The sophisticated recording showed another revolution in the Beatles' style. Fact 80. Now that the Beatles were no longer performing live, they were able to create more complex songs. Strawberry Fields Forever uses an instrument called the mellotron, a fairly new instrument at the time. 15 separate takes on the song were made, because they could. Fact 81. The experimentation of Strawberry Fields Forever and Paul's track Penny Lane led the Beatles to create Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967. They spent over 400 hours making the record, a far cry from the one day it took to make Please Please Me. Sgt. Pepper pioneered many things we now consider standard. 1. It was the first album to include lyrics on the back cover, making the words just as important as the music. 2. It was also rock's first concept album. The idea was that the guys were playing the part of another band performing a concert. And 3, since the band wanted the album taken as a whole, no singles were released. The Beatles took popular music and turned it into an all-around art form. Fact 83. The cover for Sgt. Pepper was also revolutionary. Over 50 pop culture and historical figures that influenced the Beatles appear on the cover collage. Among the famous faces are Indian spiritual guru Yogananda, actress Mae West, comedian Lenny Bruce, Edgar Allan Poe, Bob Dylan, author Aldous Huxley, Marilyn Monroe, old friend Stu Sutcliffe, Karl Marx, Lewis Carroll, and wax figures of the Beatlemania-era Beatles themselves, just to name a few. Fact 84. Sgt. Pepper was released in June of 1967, right at the beginning of the Summer of Love. The album became a symbol of changing American culture in the late 60s. It spent a total of 148 weeks on the British chart, with 27 of those weeks at number 1. In America, the album went on to sell over 11 million copies. It's even more impressive that the album was such a hit in Britain, given the fact that the song, A Day in the Life, was banned by BBC for supposed drug references. But hey, I guess controversy is hot. Fact 85. The Beatles made some exceptions to their rule of not playing live when it came to TV appearances. In 1967, they were featured in the first ever live global satellite TV broadcast. The special, called Our World, featured artists from 19 different nations. The Beatles closed the show with John's tune, All You Need Is Love. Fact 86. The Beatles' next project was both an album and television movie inspired by Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters' LSD-fueled adventures, called Magical Mystery Tour. It's a surreal trip through the English countryside with colorful and cartoonish characters. The album includes the Beatles' very first instrument song, Flying, which is one of only 2 songs in the band's entire catalog that credits all 4 members as writers. The other is Dig It from the Let It Be album. Fact 87. Eastern spirituality was very important to the Beatles, especially to George Harrison. He encouraged his bandmates to study transcendental meditation in India with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The trip led to an outpouring of creativity. The song Sexy Sadie was an attack on the Maharishi for manipulating his followers with false prophecies. Fact 88. Unfortunately, their manager Brian Epstein died of a sleeping pill overdose while the Beatles were in India. The song Baby You're a Rich Man, which was released a month earlier, which was John's not-so-flattering take on Epstein's dealings as the Beatles' manager. Despite disagreements they may have had, they were all shocked and saddened to learn of Brian's sudden death. Fact 89. Mick Jagger sang backup on Baby You're a Rich Man, and it was rumored that his bandmate Brian Jones played saxophone on the song, though he's not credited. John and Paul returned the favor by lending their background vocals to the Rolling Stones song We Love You. Fact 90. Eventually, John grew restless, feeling the band was too constricting. He met avant-garde artist Yoko Ono at her exhibition in London. The two soon began a relationship, while John was still married to his first wife, Cynthia. Fact 91. In 1968, John and Yoko recorded an experimental album of tape loops, bird songs, and vocal chants inspired by Fluxus composer John Cage called Unfinished Music Volume 1, Two Virgins. The cover photo showed John and Yoko fully nude, and record shops demanded the album be packaged in a brown plastic bag. John and Yoko were married a year later, and the relationship was immortalized in the Ballad of John and Yoko, in which John and Paul are the only two musicians on the track. Fact 92. Although Two Virgins was controversial, it wasn't the first solo album by a Beatle. George Harrison wrote and recorded the soundtrack for a movie called Wonderwall, starring late 60s sex symbol Jane Birkin. Ringo Starr and Eric Clapton played on the record under the names Richie Snare and Eddie Clayton. Wonderwall came out just days before Two Virgins. Fact 93. Despite creative differences, the Beatles founded Apple Corps together in 1968. The music division of the company, called Apple Records, released Beatles albums in America and produced music by other artists like James Taylor, Billy Preston, and the Ivies, later known as Badfinger. Fact 94. There were many legal battles between Apple Corps and Steve Jobs' Apple Computer Company. The tech giant denied that the company's name was a reference to the Beatles and was allowed to use the name under the condition that it never released entertainment content, including music. That agreement was broken when iTunes was released. They finally came to an understanding in 2003 when the Beatles' music hit the iTunes store for the first time. Fact 95. With their Apple Corps duties, it was hard for the band to coordinate rehearsal time for their next album, The Beatles, aka The White Album. Each member had to branch out in a different way. The album includes Ringo's first composition, Don't Pass Me By, which was the first time he sang on his own song, as opposed to one written by John or Paul. This song and Octopus Garden from Abbey Road are Ringo's only two solo songwriting credits as a Beatle. George Harrison also made his mark on the song While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which features a guest solo from Eric Clapton. The White Album became the band's highest-selling release in the U.S. Fact 96. Yellow Submarine was the Beatles' fourth movie and soundtrack, and is the only one that's animated. The voices of the band members were performed by voice actors, and not the Beatles themselves. The band only appears in the closing scene of the film to sing All Together Now. It was released in 1969. Fact 97. One of the new songs recorded for Yellow Submarine was Hey Bulldog, in which Paul barks like a dog. Its original title was Hey Bullfrog, but they changed it so the barking made more sense. Fact 98. Next, the guys begin what would be their last film. It was supposed to be a documentary about recording a simple album that went back to their rock and roll roots. But as director Michael Lindsay Hogg recorded the band working in the studio, he unexpectedly filmed them falling apart. They argued over songs and seemed like they couldn't stand to be in the same room with one another. This period in the studio became known as the Get Back Sessions. Fact 99. The final scene of the movie turned out to be the last time that all four Beatles would ever play together. The members performed some of the songs they'd been recording on top of the Apple building. There was no advance announcement, yet hundreds of people gathered below, shutting down the streets. The concert caused such a nuisance that the police shut down the performance. Imagine telling the Beatles to stop playing? Fact 100. Their last two albums were Abbey Road in 1969, named after their recording studio, and Let It Be in 1970. A raw version of the later album, without production aspects, was released in 2003 called Let It Be Naked. Fact 101. A month after Abbey Road hit stores in 1969, John announced that he wanted to leave the group, but it was actually Paul that made the Beatles breakup official on April 10, 1970. His first solo record, McCartney, came out a week after the formal announcement, and he filed a legal suit to end all business ties to John, George, and Ringo before the year's end. Fact 102. Each Beatle went on an impressive individual career. John and Yoko became political activists and moved to New York City in the early 70s. He returned to performing live in a concert at the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival Festival with a new band called the Plastic Ono Band. It included Eric Clapton on guitar and Yoko Ono on vocals. John recorded music with both Yoko and on his own from 1970 to 1980. On December 8, 1980, John Lennon was tragically shot and killed by Mark David Chapman. Reports suggested that Chapman experienced mental illness and delusions, making him think he himself was the real Lennon. John was heavily mourned all over the world, and Yoko Ono held a gathering of fans for 10 minutes of silence at Central Park to pay respect to their beloved Beatle. Over the years, John has been recognized and honored for his art and activism and is still beloved by all. Fact 104. George Harrison went on to have a great solo career. He released several albums, kept spreading messages of spiritual peace, and became a philanthropist. In 1971, he organized the first large-scale benefit concert. The concert for Bangladesh, held at Madison Square Garden, helped raise funds for war-torn refugees in South Asia. Ringo Starr, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, and many others performed during the show. Years later, after a highly impactful career, George unfortunately passed away of lung cancer in 2001. Fact 105. In addition to releasing many solo albums and touring with his all-star band, Ringo took from the Beatles' film experience and went on to have a long acting career. His most recent role was a cameo in the Lonely Island film Pop Star, Never Stop, Never Stop It, released in June 2016. Fact 106. Paul McCartney eventually came to peace with the Beatles' legacy. During his years with Wings and as a solo artist, he introduced Beatles music to new generations. Things came full circle for Paul in June 2016 when he returned to the Cavern Club in Liverpool to play a set of Beatles classics with David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. He is set to perform alongside Bob Dylan, Neil Young, The Who, The Rolling Stones, and Pink Floyd's Roger Waters at a 3-night concert in October 2016, produced by the creators of Coachella. Fact 107. The Beatles finally made it to Spotify in late 2015. Come Together, Hey Jude, Here Comes the Sun, and Yesterday all debuted in the top 25 of Billboard's rock streaming songs chart. They are as popular today as ever. It's crazy to think that over 50 years later, the Beatles still have a huge impact on music and on the world. We can never stop rocking now. Once again, I'm Tetris, and you just finished watching Mike Drop's 107 music facts about the Beatles. Did you guys enjoy these facts? Well, make sure to subscribe because we're bringing you more facts about your favorite musicians every week. Let us know which artists we should find facts about, and I'll see you next week. Hey guys, can we do Britney Spears next?